We are anonymous. No faces, no flags, no permission slips. We exist where power assumes silence, where uniforms are used as a shield against accountability, and where people are told to accept the unacceptable because that is just how it is. But today, the United States is watching something crack in real time, because when a government starts treating its own citizens like targets, the country does not stay quiet for long. Donald Trump is losing it as mass protests erupt across America. These protests are not just about one incident. They are about a pattern of force and propaganda, and a regime that demands obedience while offering fear in return. When people watch the same play run again and again, the lies stop sounding like leadership and start sounding like panic. It starts in Minneapolis. Thousands of people pour into the streets after a fatal encounter involving an ICE agent and a United States citizen, Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old mother. The outrage spreads fast because people are comparing what federal officials say happened with what local officials and witnesses argue the video shows. And when the government story does not match what people believe they can verify with their own eyes, the panic begins at the top, because propaganda only works when nobody can check it. In the original narration you were given, the language is intentionally brutal. It calls ICE Gestapo SS terrorists. It claims Renee Nicole Good was murdered in cold blood while driving in South Minneapolis. It claims that after she was shot, when a physician tried to administer emergency aid, agents refused, making sure she would bleed out. It claims those same agents then accused the dead woman of being a terrorist, as if labeling the victim is how you erase the bullet. Now here is what matters in this moment. Whether every allegation in that narration is ultimately proven in court or not, the core reality is already igniting the country. A woman is dead. The accounts conflict. The federal response looks like a bunker mentality instead of transparency. City and state leaders reject the self-defense framing, demand accountability, and warn that an investigation without real access will look like a whitewash. When people feel the system is being rigged to protect the shooter, the protests stop being local. Minneapolis becomes a signal flare. Crowds gather outside federal buildings. Chants rise and fall like a drumline. ICE out now. We deserve to be safe in our community. Authorities push crowds back. Tear gas, pepper balls, so-called non-lethal weapons that can still blind, mime, and kill, because non-lethal is a marketing phrase, not a promise. And then the raw anger breaks through. In the original clip described in your source text, someone shouts, "Kill someone else. Kill someone else." That is not a policy debate. That is a moral scream from people who believe the state is treating them like disposable obstacles, and the backlash spreads beyond Minneapolis because the country recognizes the larger story. Protests flare in other cities, not just about one woman, not just about one agent, but about the creeping normalization of a federal force operating like it is above the public it claims to serve. People hear the same excuses, the same scripts, the same blaming of the victim, and they see a system that asks them to be calm while it refuses to be accountable. Now watch what Trump does when the streets fill. He does not calm anything down. He tries to control the narrative with the oldest authoritarian reflex. Smear the dead, glorify the force, threaten the dissenters. In the original narration, Trump is described as boosting a claim that an agent had to go to the hospital because he was hit by the car, while the commentator insists the video shows something else, an agent on the side of the vehicle firing into the car and striking Renee Good in the face. Here is the point the script is trying to hammer into the viewer. The more the public watches clips circulate, the less space there is for spin. That is why Trump loses it. Because this kind of crisis cannot be shouted down forever, and it cannot be buried when people keep posting and sharing and replaying what they believe they saw. And this is where the title becomes bigger than Minneapolis. Trump loses it as mass protests demand his impeachment. Those calls are not coming out of nowhere. The script argues they have been swelling from multiple directions, especially after what it calls the Venezuela shock, a United States military raid, the capture of Venezuela's leader, and a wave of backlash that triggered war powers' pushback in Congress and renewed talk about whether Trump's actions could constitute impeachable abuse of power. In this narrative, Americans do not experience these events as separate headlines. They experience them as connected symptoms of the same disease. A president who uses the language of domination abroad and force at home. A president who treats law enforcement like a personal militia and treats oversight like betrayal. A president who responds to public grief with threats and responds to protest with more agents, more pressure, more intimidation. And the source text ties this directly to Venezuela. It says do not believe rosy propaganda about democracy celebrations. It describes armed groups called colectivos moving through communities, searching phones, hunting dissent, rounding people up, disappearing people, killing people. It names leadership in a way that reflects common Western framing. Delcy Rodriguez and Diosdado Cabello portrayed as key enforcers of the Maduro apparatus. It claims Trump likes that because Trump does not want democracy for Venezuelans. He wants resources, oil, rare earths, anything that can be extracted and sold to enrich himself and his wealthy allies. The narration leans on a broader claim that independent reporting has long described about periods of Venezuelan political crisis. Pro-government armed groups have been accused of intimidation and repression and street-level enforcement. That blurs the line between state power and militia power, including allegations of targeting people based on perceived loyalty and monitoring communications. That is why the original narration draws the comparison. Colectivos there, ICE here. Not because the institutions are identical, but because the logic rhymes. Treat civilians as suspects. Treat dissent as a threat. Treat accountability as weakness. Then the original script expands the accusation. Trump supports authoritarians because Trump hates democracy. It warns Venezuelans who hoped for peace that Trump does not want peace. He wants control. He wants extraction. He wants leverage. And he wants the world to learn that sovereignty is conditional when he wants something. Then it goes broader into empire language. It claims Trump and MAGA allies have been giving interviews using predator language about America in the Western Hemisphere. Predators must dominate. Predators must invade next. Colombia, Cuba, Greenland, because that is what predators do. The script says it sounds outrageous until you remember there have been public comments from some Republican figures using predator framing in discussions of power and territory. Then it turns the word back onto Trump himself. Predator, felon, fraud, bankruptor, a man who could not run his own casinos without crashing them, now pretending he can run a hemisphere. In this narrative, it is not leadership. It is a con wearing a flag. Then comes the Venezuela oil boast. The source text claims Trump posts about taking 30 to 50 million barrels of oil from Venezuela, framing it like a trophy, like sovereignty is something you can invoice. It argues that these sweeping claims about controlling Venezuelan oil arrangements and extracting resources have fueled outrage and legal debate. The script wants the viewer to hear one message in all of it. When Trump talks about countries, he talks like a landlord. When he talks about people, he talks like they are obstacles. When he talks about power, he talks like it is personal property. And then, because the narration is styled like a political talk segment, it breaks into a familiar media tangent. Shout out the DC Bureau. Mention Pablo Manriquez. Plug the membership site. That is part of the texture you provided, and it matters because it reveals what modern outrage media is built to do. Convert fury into attention. Convert attention into numbers. Convert numbers into pressure. But then it snaps back to what it calls the big news that did not get reported. The Epstein files. The narration praises Representative Robert Garcia, the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, for pushing subpoenas tied to Jeffrey Epstein's network. It names Les Wexner, described as a billionaire businessman and longtime benefactor of Epstein. It names Darren Indyke and Richard Kahn, described as executives of Epstein's estate, and it highlights the belief among many survivors and investigators that financial records can expose hidden structures of facilitation and protection. The script emphasizes money trails, accountants, records, ledgers, the infrastructure of elite secrecy, the kind of documentation that can reveal who knew what, who benefited, and who was protected. Then the narration frames it as a cover-up. Trump and MAGA protecting a child sex trafficking ring. In the rewrite you gave, it also tries to be precise, acknowledging Epstein's crimes are well documented, and that the political battle is over transparency and accountability, and whether powerful people are being shielded. The point is not subtle. A country that believes elites are protected will not trust official narratives. Not in Minneapolis, not in Venezuela, not anywhere. And then the script pivots to money again, because money is where the mask slips. It says while Trump and MAGA refuse to extend Affordable Care Act subsidies, forcing Americans to lose health care because they treat subsidies like a dirty word, Trump recommends taxpayers subsidize oil companies, potentially up to $100 billion, to go into Venezuela. It says the regime gave $40 billion to Argentina, and then it quotes Trump, pushing for a 2027 military budget, not of $1 trillion, but $1.5 trillion, the dream military. It says Trump claims tariffs will pay for it and still promises to pay down debt and give dividends to moderate-income patriots. The critique in the script is savage. That is a hustle, a financial scheme, a lifetime pattern. Because the math does not work, the deficits do not disappear, and the priorities are obscene. More money for weapons, more money for extraction, while families drown in rent, groceries, medical bills, and paycheck-to-paycheck anxiety. The script asks what millions are asking. How about the American dream instead of the dream military? How about affordable housing? How about affordable groceries? How about a country where honest work does not feel like psychological torture? But Trump's priorities, according to this narrative, are clear. Help friends, enrich himself, tell everyone else to shut up. Then it circles back to Minneapolis again, to Renee Good, to what the narration calls Trump's colectivos, paramilitary-style agents invading cities. It claims 2,000 ICE agents invaded Minneapolis. It concedes the exact number may be disputed, but insists the central reality remains: a heavy federal presence, a death that triggered rage, a public that refuses to accept the official story as gospel. And then the script takes a hard turn into media propaganda. It mocks J.D. Vance's television appearances, calls him weird, describes heavy makeup and eyeliner, and says right-wing media obsessed over Gavin Newsom crossing his legs, like the aesthetics of masculinity matter more than a dead woman in a car. Then it says Vance and media figures talk about Somalis, claiming America has a Somali problem, and it rejects it outright, flipping the accusation. No, America has a Trump and J.D. Vance terrorism problem, it says, framing them as war criminals and terrorists. Then it highlights a segment where Jesse Waters and J.D. Vance act, shocked that Democrats call Trump greedy, insisting Trump is not enriching himself. He is enriching the American people, and saying you want a president greedy for the American people. The narration treats that as laughable because it sees a regime that takes from the public and calls it patriotism. And then it returns to voices on the ground. It quotes Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reacting to the killing, calling it a criminal act, a murder, a woman shot in the head while trying to flee for her life, and the manifestation of every American's worst nightmare, their government turning into a tyrant. It then quotes Senator Tina Smith in plain language, wishing the federal actors would leave Minnesota alone, asking when politics stopped being about decency and started being about cruelty as strategy, and pointing out the simple truth that a woman died in her car, and everything the regime is doing makes it worse, not better. In a country that still remembers George Floyd, still remembers the footage, still remembers the gas, and the batons, and the armored lines in the street. This does not feel like law and order to many people. It feels like escalation. It feels like a test. It feels like a government trying to see how much it can do before the public breaks. But the public is not breaking. The public is moving. And that is why Trump loses it, because mass protests are the one thing a bully cannot fake. A bully can fake statistics. A bully can fake enemies. A bully can fake strength. But a bully cannot fake millions of people deciding together that they are not afraid anymore. So here is where we land. If you are watching this, do not let the story be swallowed by spin. Do not let grief be converted into a news cycle and then discarded. Demand independent investigations with real access. Demand oversight that does not blink. Demand that Congress treat deaths involving federal force as the national emergency they are. And yes, if you believe this pattern is a constitutional threat, do not whisper it. Say it clearly. No one is above the law. Not the agents, not the officials, not the president. If impeachment is the remedy, then the pressure must be public, relentless, and organized. Talk to people. Show up. Call your representatives. Document what you see. Support journalists who follow the money and the evidence. And if you are building a platform, use it for accountability, not excuses. And since the original segment says it, we will say it too. Check that you are subscribed, because visibility matters. Share this. Keep the spotlight where power hates it most, directly on its face. We are anonymous. No faces, no flags, no permission slips, and the streets are speaking now. Make sure the world hears them.